Greg Thompson's life transformed forever the day 4 alien princesses laughed at him as Earth's representative to the Zanari Empire. He never anticipated inheriting all 4 of them in their late king's will. The year was 2045, and humanity had just made first contact with an advanced alien civilization, the Zanari Empire, led by King Zak Thor. They arrived on Earth with technology beyond human understanding. Their enormous mothership hovered in orbit, a constant reminder of the power disparity between our species. During the initial meeting with world leaders, Greg stood tall, despite the mocking giggles of the 4 Zanari princesses Leia, Nexar, Voila, and Zenthia, who openly ridiculed Earth's primitive technology and societal structures. Their laughter echoed through the conference room, a symphony of disdain that made Greg's jaw tighten. But where others perceived human frailty, King Zak Thor saw potential. Over the ensuing month, Greg's quick thinking and adaptability captured the alien monarch's attention. The former U.S. Marine turned diplomat found himself spending increasing time with the Zanari royal family, particularly bonding with Raxer, the king's trusted advisor. Unbeknownst to everyone, a rare Zanari disease was ravaging King Zak Thor's body. As his condition deteriorated, the king made a decision that would shake both Earth and the Zanari Empire to their foundations. He secretly amended his will, naming Greg as a potential heir. The pivotal moment arrived during a state dinner aboard the Zanari mothership. King Zak Thor collapsed, his final act activating a hidden protocol in the ship's systems. As life slipped away from the alien ruler, a holographic message flickered to life, revealing his last will and testament. Shock coursed through the gathering as Greg Thompson was named inheritor of vast Zanari wealth, advanced technologies, and guardianship of the 4 princesses. The stipulation was clear. Greg must marry at least one of the princesses within 1 Earth year to claim the Zanari throne. Chaos erupted as the human government scrambled to comprehend the implications of one of their own potentially ruling an alien empire. The Zanari High Council convened an emergency session, questioning the legitimacy of the king's will. Meanwhile, the 4 princesses who had once dismissed Greg and all of humanity now found themselves entangled in a complex web of political intrigue. Forced to reevaluate their views and possibly compete for his affections, Greg stood at the center of this interstellar storm, overwhelmed by his sudden change in status. He faced resentment and suspicion from fellow humans while navigating the treacherous waters of alien politics. Raxer, seeing an opportunity to shape the future of the Zanari Empire, positioned himself as Greg's primary advisor, beginning the monumental task of teaching him Zanari culture and governance. As news of King Zak Thor's will spread across the stars, factions within both the Zanari Empire and Earth began plotting. Some sought to support Greg's newfound position, while others schemed to undermine it. The stage was set for a complex tale of interspecies politics, cultural clashes, and unexpected alliances. Greg Thompson, once an ordinary human, now found himself at the epicenter of a galactic power struggle. The fate of humanity in the Zanari Empire hung in the balance, all because a dying alien king saw potential where his daughters saw only primitives. As Greg looked at the 4 princesses who had once laughed at him, he realized his greatest challenge lay ahead, turning derision into diplomacy and perhaps even desire. As the holographic message of King Zak Thor faded, leaving behind a stunned silence, Greg Thompson found himself at the center of a whirlwind. The Zanari mothership's grand hall, moments ago filled with the pomp and circumstance of a state dinner, now buzzed with urgent whispers and barely concealed outrage. Chancellor Kovac, a towering figure with iridescent scales and piercing yellow eyes, was the first to break the silence. "This is absurd," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the hall. "A human cannot rule the Zanari Empire. It goes against every tradition we hold sacred." Greg's mind raced, trying to process the enormity of what had just transpired. He glanced at the 4 princesses, their earlier derision replaced by a mix of shock, confusion, and in some cases calculation. Leia, the eldest, caught his eye for a moment, her expression unreadable. Before Greg could formulate a response, Raxer stepped forward, the king's advisor. A slender Zanari with metallic blue skin placed a hand on Greg's shoulder. "The king's will is explicit," Raxer stated firmly. "We must honor his final wishes." The following days passed in a blur of activity. Greg found himself sequestered in a luxurious suite aboard the mothership, surrounded by a team of Zanari tutors handpicked by Raxer as they began the monumental task of educating him on Zanari culture and governance. News of King Zak Thor's shocking declaration spread across both Earth and the stars. On the third day, as Greg struggled to memorize the complex lineage of Zanari royal houses, a priority communication from Earth interrupted his studies. The holographic image of UN Secretary-General Elena Rodriguez materialized in his room. "Thompson," she began, her voice tense, "I hope you grasp the seriousness of your position. The Security Council is in an uproar, and half the members see this as our chance to secure humanity's place among the stars. The other half fear we will become a target for every hostile alien race in the galaxy." Greg nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders. "I understand, Madam Secretary. I'm doing my best to navigate the situation, but I need time." As the communication ended, Raxer entered the room. "It's time for your first lesson in Zanari technology," he announced. Over the next few hours, Greg's mind reeled as Raxer introduced him to concepts that seemed pulled from the pages of science fiction. Faster than light travel, advanced systems that could predict galactic events centuries in advance, and energy sources that could power entire solar systems. Greg's military background proved invaluable as he quickly grasped the strategic implications of these technologies. This FTL drive, he mused, examining a holographic schematic, it could revolutionize Earth's space exploration programs. Raxer nodded approvingly. "Indeed, but be cautious, Greg. Not all Zanari will be eager to share our advancements with humans." As Greg delved deeper into his studies, he began to notice a shift in the princess's behavior. Leah, once openly contemptuous, now sought him out for conversations about Earth's history and culture. "Tell me about your world wars," she requested one evening, her silver eyes gleaming with interest. "How did your species survive such devastation?" Greg found himself engaging in lengthy discussions with her, surprised by her quick grasp of human geopolitics. Yet a part of him remained wary, sensing a hidden agenda behind her sudden curiosity. Nexar, the second eldest princess, took a different approach. She burst into his quarters one morning, brandishing a pair of Zanari training weapons. "If you're to rule us, human, you must prove your worth in combat," she declared. What followed was a series of grueling physical contests. Greg's marine training served him well, but Nexar's alien strength pushed him to his limits. As they sparred in the ship's training arena, he couldn't help but notice the grudging respect growing in her eyes. Voila! The third princess preferred to test Greg's intellectual capabilities. She presented him with increasingly complex Zanari technological puzzles, watching closely as he worked through them. "Impressive," she muttered one day, as Greg successfully recalibrated a malfunctioning quantum communications array. "Perhaps there's hope for you yet." The youngest, Zenthia, remained a mystery. She avoided direct interaction with Greg, but he often caught her observing him from afar, her expression inscrutable. As Greg navigated these complex relationships, a sense of unease began to grow. Fragments of overheard conversations, encrypted messages glimpsed on Zanari data terminals, and the sudden redeployment of several warships all pointed to something ominous. Late one night, unable to sleep, Greg decided to put his newly acquired knowledge of Zanari systems to the test. He accessed a secure terminal in his quarters, using techniques Raxer had taught him to bypass several layers of encryption. What he found chilled him to the core. Hidden deep within classified military files were plans for a full-scale invasion of Earth. The architect of this plan was none other than General Dror, a high-ranking Zanari military leader known for his hardline stance against interspecies cooperation. As Greg dug deeper, he uncovered communication logs between General Dror and Chancellor Kovac. The two were conspiring to use the current political instability to launch their attack, believing it would prove Zanari superiority and invalidate King Zak Thor's decision. Greg's mind raced. He needed to act fast, but he couldn't do it alone. He needed allies, both here on the mothership and back on Earth. As he formulated a plan, a priority alert flashed across the terminal screen. Chancellor Kovac had called for a vote of no confidence in Greg's claim to the throne. The political maneuvering threatened to destabilize the entire Zanari Empire and leave Earth vulnerable to attack. Greg realized that his next moves would determine not just his fate, but the fate of two civilizations. He needed to find a way to secure his position, expose the planned invasion, and somehow bridge the vast gulf between human and Zanari cultures. As dawn broke over the curved horizon of Earth, visible from his window, Greg made a decision. He would address the Zanari High Council directly. It was a risky move, but it might be his only chance to prevent a catastrophe. But first, he needed to determine which of the princesses was feeding information to Chancellor Kovach. As Greg prepared for the most important speech of his life and quite possibly the most important speech in human history, he knew that somewhere on this vast alien ship a traitor was working to undermine everything he was fighting for. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance and the clock was ticking. Greg's fingers flew across the Zanari terminal, his newfound knowledge of their systems guiding his actions as he delved deeper into the encrypted files. A flashing message caught his eye, and his heart raced as he decrypted it, revealing a correspondence between Princess Leia and Chancellor Kovach. For a moment, Greg felt the weight of betrayal. Had he misjudged Leia's recent interest in human culture? But as he read on, his eyes widened in surprise. The information Leia was feeding to Kovach was cleverly crafted misinformation designed to mislead and buy time. Greg's mind raced. He needed to confront Leia, but discretion was paramount. Using the Zanari communication system, he sent her a coded message requesting an urgent meeting in a secluded section of the mothership's botanical gardens. As Greg made his way through the winding corridors, the ship's artificial atmosphere seemed to grow heavier. He found Leia waiting among a cluster of bioluminescent alien flora, her silver eyes reflecting the soft pulsing light. "You've discovered my communications with Chancellor Kovach," Leia stated, her voice calm but tinged with tension. Greg nodded, studying her face. "I have, but I've also seen their content. You're feeding him false information." Leia's posture relaxed slightly. "I am. I realize the danger Kovach poses to both our peoples. I couldn't stand idly by while he and General Dror plotted against my father's wishes and threatened your world. Why didn't you come to me directly?" Greg asked, stepping closer. "I needed to be certain of your intentions, Greg Thompson. My father saw something in you, but I had to see it for myself." Leia's gaze softened. "I believe I understand now why he chose you." Greg felt a shift in the air between them, a new understanding forming. "We need to work together, Leia. The situation is more dire than you know. Kovach and Dror are planning a full-scale invasion of Earth." Leia's eyes widened. "Then we have no time to lose. I have connections within the High Council. I can gather support while you prepare your address." Over the next few days, Greg and Leia worked tirelessly. Greg used his growing mastery of Zanari technology to hack into Kovach's personal communications, uncovering damning evidence of the planned invasion. Meanwhile, Leia moved through the political circles of the mothership, whispering in the right ears and securing allies. As the day of the High Council meeting approached, Greg noticed a change in the other princess's behavior. Nexar approached him after a particularly grueling training session, her eyes gleaming with newfound respect. "You fight well for a human, Greg Thompson," she said, wiping sweat from her brow. "Perhaps you are not as soft as I first thought. If you succeed in claiming the throne, I would be honored to serve as your military advisor." Greg, caught off guard by the offer, nodded gratefully. "I would welcome your expertise, Nexar." Later that same day, Voila cornered Greg in one of the ship's research labs. "Your grasp of our technology is impressive," she admitted, gesturing to a complex holographic display. "I propose a joint human-Zanari scientific initiative. Together, we could push the boundaries of galactic knowledge." Greg's mind raced with the possibilities. "That's an excellent idea, Voila. We'll discuss the details once we've dealt with the current crisis." Even the elusive Zenthia seemed to be warming to Greg's presence. She often caught him watching her from afar, her expression no longer one of disdain but of curiosity. On Earth, tension reached a fever pitch. Jake Martinez, now in command of Earth's combined military forces, initiated emergency protocols. Fleets of ships took up defensive positions, and ground-based weapons were primed for a potential alien invasion. As Greg donned the formal attire of a Zanari diplomat, he felt the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. Leia appeared at his side, her presence a steadying force. "Are you ready?" she asked, her hand briefly touching his arm. Greg took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." They entered the High Council chamber together, presenting a united front. The room buzzed with tension as Greg took his place at the center. He had barely begun his address when Chancellor Kovach's voice boomed through the chamber. "This is an outrage. A human cannot possibly rule the Zanari Empire. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence." Greg's heart raced, but he forced himself to remain calm. This was the moment they had prepared for. With a nod to Leah, he activated the holographic display he had prepared. "Before we proceed with any votes, I believe the Council should see this," Greg announced, his voice steady. The chamber filled with the flickering images of Kovach's secret communications. The Chancellor's face paled as his plans for Earth's invasion were laid bare for all to see. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembly. "This is treachery," Kovach bellowed, but his protests were drowned out by the growing uproar. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the mothership as a Zanari officer burst into the chamber, his scales flashing with urgency. "General Dror has launched an attack on Earth," he announced. "Our loyalist forces are in disarray." The Council erupted into chaos. Greg locked eyes with Leah, a silent understanding passing between them. It was time to act. "Counselors," Greg's voice cut through the din. "Earth is under attack by those who would defy King Zak Thor's last wishes. I ask for your trust and your aid. Let us show the galaxy the true strength of the Zanari Empire, not through conquest, but through alliance." As Greg's words hung in the air, he knew the real battle was just beginning. The fate of two civilizations now rested on what happened next. In the next few hours, Greg took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenge ahead. As he addressed the assembly, his voice steady and resolute. "We face a threat not just to Earth but to the entire Zanari Empire. I propose we unite our forces to repel this attack and demonstrate the strength of our newfound alliance." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. Even Chancellor Kovach, his plans exposed, remained silent. Greg turned to Princess Nexar, who stood at attention, her warrior instincts already engaged. "Princess, can you coordinate with our fleet to defend Earth?" Nexar nodded sharply. "It would be my honor, Greg Thompson. Our ships stand ready." As the Council mobilized, Greg felt a hand on his arm. He turned to find Leah, her silver eyes shining with a mix of admiration and concern. "You've done well, Greg," she said softly, "but this is only the beginning." Greg nodded, acutely aware of the challenges that lay ahead. He had prevented an invasion and exposed a conspiracy, but the real work of uniting two vastly different civilizations was just beginning. In the days that followed, Greg found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. The High Council, impressed by his leadership during the crisis, provisionally accepted his claim to the throne. However, they imposed a new condition. Greg must choose one of the 4 princesses as his bride within the next 3 Earth months, half the time originally stipulated in King Zak Thor's will. Greg knew this decision would have far-reaching consequences, not just for himself but for the future of human-Zanari relations. Each princess brought unique qualities to the table, and he found himself spending more time with each of them. As he grappled with the weight of his choice, Leah continued to be his closest confidant in political matters. Her sharp mind and diplomatic skills proved invaluable as Greg navigated the complex web of Zanari politics. One evening, as they pored over reports in his quarters, Leah looked up at him with a soft smile. "You're adapting well to Zanari customs, Greg," she observed. "It's impressive." Greg felt a warmth in his chest at her words. But before he could respond, an alert chimed on his communication device. It was Jake Martinez calling from Earth. "Greg, we've got a situation down here," Jake's voice crackled through the speaker. "A group calling themselves Earth First is holding rallies against the Zanari Alliance. They're led by Senator Richard Hawthorne, and they're gaining traction." Greg frowned, exchanging a worried glance with Leah. "Thanks, Jake. Keep me posted. We'll need to address this soon." As Greg worked to manage the growing unrest on Earth, he also faced challenges within the Zanari Empire. A faction of Zanari purists, led by a charismatic religious leader named Vortek, began to speak out against a human ruling the empire. To address these issues and foster cooperation between humans and Zanari, Greg established the Earth Zanari Cooperative Council, EZCC. He appointed Jake as Earth's primary military leader, working closely with Princess Nexar to integrate human and Zanari defense strategies. Greg found himself spending more time with Nexar as they worked on joint military exercises. Her initial disdain had transformed into respect, and he found her direct approach refreshing. "Your Earth military has potential," Nexar commented during one of their training sessions. "With proper guidance, they could become formidable allies." Greg grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. "High praise coming from you." As Greg balanced his duties as leader and his growing relationships with the princesses, Princess Voila approached him with an intriguing proposal. Her eyes gleamed with excitement as she laid out plans for a joint human-Zanari research project. "Imagine, Greg," she said, gesturing to a holographic display of complex equations. "A clean energy source that could power both our civilizations. It could revolutionize our worlds." Greg nodded, seeing the potential for such a project to strengthen ties between their species. "Let's do it. We'll need to assemble a team of the best minds from both Earth and the Zanari Empire." Even the once distant Xenthia began to show interest in Greg's presence. She approached him one day in the ship's vast library, her usually aloof demeanor softened by curiosity. "I wish to understand more about Earth's culture," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Your art, your music, they're so different from ours. Would you show me?" Greg spent hours with Xenthia, sharing Earth's greatest works of art and literature. He found himself moved by her genuine interest and the way she saw human creativity through new eyes. As Greg navigated these deepening relationships and the complexities of his new role, he stumbled upon a hidden message in the royal archives. The holographic image of King Zak Thor flickered to life before him. "Greg Thompson," the message began, "if you're seeing this, then my gambit has paid off. My choice of you as heir was not random. I foresaw a threat to our empire, one that can only be overcome by uniting with humanity. The fate of both our species rests on your shoulders." The message faded, leaving Greg stunned. The weight of his responsibility, already immense, now felt crushing. He realized that his choice of bride, his every decision, could have consequences far beyond what he had imagined. As Greg absorbed this new information, alarms blared throughout the mothership. Reports flooded in of simultaneous attacks on Earth and Zanari outposts. The attacks bore the hallmark of both human and Zanari tactics, but neither side claimed responsibility. Greg's mind raced. Could this be the threat King Zak Thor had foreseen, or was it something else entirely? As he mobilized the EZCC to respond to the crisis, Greg knew that the true test of his leadership was just beginning. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and time was running out. Greg's mind raced as he processed the implications of the simultaneous attacks on Earth and Zanari outposts. The alarms continued to blare throughout the mothership, creating an atmosphere of urgency and tension. "We need to act fast," Greg said, turning to Leah. "Contact the EZCC. We need a full report on the situation." As Leah moved to comply, Greg's communication device chimed again. It was Jake Martinez, his face grim on the holographic display. "Greg, it's worse than we thought," Jake reported. "These attacks bear the hallmark of both human and Zanari tactics, but neither side is claiming responsibility. It's like we're fighting ghosts." Greg frowned, his mind working overtime. "Jake, I want you to lead a joint investigation with a team of Zanari intelligence officers. We need to get to the bottom of this." As Jake acknowledged the order, Greg turned his attention to the immediate crisis. Over the next few days he worked tirelessly with the princesses and the EZCC to coordinate defenses and mitigate the damage from the attacks. Princess Nexar proved invaluable in organizing the Zanari military response, her tactical acumen complementing Jake's Earth-based strategies. Together, they managed to repel several follow-up attacks, but the enemy remained elusive. Meanwhile, Princess Voila threw herself into analyzing the attack patterns, using her scientific expertise to search for clues about the mysterious assailants. "Look at this," Voila said, gesturing to a complex holographic display. "The energy signatures from these attacks don't match any known Zanari or human technology. We're dealing with something new here." As the investigation continued, Greg found himself spending more time with Princess Xenthia. Her cultural insights proved valuable in understanding the nuances of the Zanari response to the crisis. "Our people are afraid, Greg," Xenthia explained during one of their late-night discussions. "But they're also coming together. Your leadership is making a difference." Despite the progress, opposition to Greg's rule persisted. Reports from Earth indicated that Senator Hawthorne's Earth First movement was gaining traction, while Vortex's Zanari purist faction continued to speak out against human influence in the Empire. Amidst this turmoil, plans for a grand summit on the Zanari home world began to take shape. The event, scheduled to take place in the Great Crystal Dome of Zakthoria, the Zanari capital, became a focal point for both supporters and detractors of the Human-Zanari alliance. Greg threw himself into the preparations, working closely with his team. Leah used her political acumen to secure the attendance of key Zanari officials, while Nexar collaborated with Jake to oversee security measures. Voila prepared a presentation on the joint Human-Zanari Clean Energy Project, and Zenthia organized a cultural exchange program to showcase the best of both civilizations. As the summit approached, Jake's investigation team made a breakthrough during an emergency video conference. "Greg, we've identified the culprits behind the attacks," Jake said, his expression grim. "It's a previously unknown alien species called the Zorth. They're from a neighboring galaxy, and from what we can tell, they view our alliance as a threat to their expansionist plans." The news sent shockwaves through both human and Zanari leadership. As word spread, Greg noticed a shift in public opinion. The common threat began to unite many who were previously divided, though pockets of resistance remained. On the eve of the summit, as Greg reviewed his speech one last time, an alert flashed on his personal communicator. An encrypted message appeared, its source identified as King Zak Thor's personal AI, which had been dormant until now. The holographic image of the late Zanari king flickered to life before Greg. "Greg Thompson, the time has come for you to face the threat I foresaw. A massive Zorth invasion fleet is heading towards our galaxy. It has the capability to overwhelm both Earth and the Zanari Empire individually. The summit you have organized is now crucial for the survival of both our species." Greg's heart raced as he absorbed this information. The stakes had just risen exponentially. He immediately called an emergency meeting with the princesses and Jake to share this new intelligence. As the summit began the next day, Greg took center stage in the magnificent crystal dome, flanked by the 4 princesses. The atmosphere was tense, with delegates from Earth and the Zanari Empire eyeing each other warily. Greg began his address, his voice steady and clear. "Distinguished delegates, I stand before you today not just as a leader but as a harbinger of grave news. We face a threat unlike any our civilizations have encountered before." He went on to reveal the existence of the Zorth and the impending invasion. The crystal dome erupted into chaos as delegates shouted questions and demands. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the building. Through the smoke, Greg saw Senator Hawthorne and Vortek leading a group of armed supporters into the chamber. "This human has no right to rule," Vortek shouted. "The Zanari Empire will not bow to Earth before the attackers could get far." Jake Martinez and Princess Nexar sprang into action. They coordinated the human and Zanari security forces with practiced efficiency, quickly neutralizing the threat. Despite the interruption, Greg remained calm. He continued his address, outlining a bold plan to combine human ingenuity with Zanari technology to create a defensive network capable of repelling the Zorth invasion. As Greg concluded his speech, he noticed the 4 princesses exchanging meaningful glances. They approached him as the delegates began to disperse, their expressions a mix of purpose and something else Greg couldn't quite identify. Leah spoke first, her voice low. "Greg, we have a proposal for you. One that could solidify our alliance and provide the leadership both our civilizations need in this crisis." Before she could continue, an aide rushed up to Greg, scales flashing with urgency. "Your Majesty, we've detected Zorth scout ships entering the outskirts of the Empire." Greg's mind raced. Whatever the princesses were about to propose would have to wait. The invasion had begun, and the fate of 2 civilizations now hung in the balance. He turned to face the challenges ahead, knowing that his next actions would shape the future of interstellar relations and determine whether the human-Zanari alliance could withstand the impending Zorth onslaught. The onslaught was about to begin. Greg took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "Your Majesty," Leah said, her voice cutting through the tension, "we don't have much time. Our proposal is crucial for the future of both our species." Greg turned to face the 4 princesses, noting the determination in their eyes. "I'm listening," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Leah continued, "We propose a polyamorous marriage alliance between you and the 4 of us. This union would symbolize the unbreakable bond between humans and Zanari, providing the leadership our civilizations need in this crisis." Greg's eyes widened as he processed the implications of their proposal. It was unconventional to say the least, but he couldn't deny the potential benefits. After a moment of contemplation, he nodded. "I accept," Greg said, his voice firm. "If this is what it takes to unite our people and face this threat together, then I'm willing to do it." The princesses exchanged looks of relief and determination. Greg turned to his aide. "Prepare for an immediate ceremony. We need to make this official before the Zorth arrive in force." Word of the impending marriage spread rapidly through both human and Zanari communication channels. The crystal dome of Zoria, still bearing scars from the recent attack, was hastily prepared for the unprecedented ceremony. Greg stood at the center of the dome, wearing a specially designed suit that blended elements of human and Zanari formal wear. The four princesses approached, each adorned in their unique royal garments. As they exchanged vows, blending traditions from both cultures, Greg could feel the weight of two civilization futures on his shoulders. The ceremony was broadcast across Earth and the Zanari Empire. Reactions varied wildly from shock and outrage to hope and celebration. But there was no time for extended debate or scrutiny. As soon as the vows were sealed, Greg and his new wives moved to the war room within the Zanari palace. "We need to coordinate our efforts," Greg said, activating a holographic display of the galaxy. "Leah, I want you to focus on diplomatic outreach. We need allies if we're going to survive this." Leah nodded, her mind already racing with potential strategies. "I'll start with the Andromeda Consortium. They've been neutral so far, but this threat might persuade them to join us." Greg turned to Nexar. "Work with Jake to integrate our military forces. We need a unified defense strategy that plays to both our strengths." Nexar's eyes gleamed with determination. "Consider it done. We'll create a force the Zorth won't soon forget." "Voila," Greg continued, "your clean energy project. Can we adapt it to power a planetary shield?" Voila's fingers flew over a datapad as she ran calculations. "It's possible, but it will require significant modifications. I'll need resources and a team of our best scientists." "You'll have them," Greg assured her. Finally, he turned to Zenthia. "We need to boost morale and rally support across both our civilizations. Can you launch a cultural campaign to unite our people?" Zenthia nodded, her usual reserve replaced by determination. "I'll create a message that resonates with both humans and Zanari. We'll face this threat as one people." As they dispersed to their tasks, an urgent communication came through. Jake's face appeared on the main screen, his expression grim. "Greg, we've got a situation on Earth," Jake reported. "Senator Hawthorne escaped during the chaos at the summit. He's taken control of a top-secret military installation and is threatening to launch experimental weapons against Zanari targets unless you step down and dissolve the alliance." Greg's lips pursed. "Damn it, this couldn't come at a worse time." "That's not all," Jake continued. "We're detecting more Zorth scout ships breaching our outer defenses. The main invasion fleet will be here sooner than anticipated." Greg studied the tactical display, his mind racing with the implications of this setback. Every moment the prototype weapon wasn't in their hands was another moment the Zorth held the advantage. A new transmission cut through his thoughts. Princess Voila's holographic image appeared, her expression a mix of excitement and concern. "Greg, we've had a breakthrough with the planetary shield," she said. "But there's a complication. We need quantium to power it at full capacity." Greg's mind raced. "Quantium? Where can we find it?" "The only viable source is on Zavor," Voila replied. "It's a dangerous jungle planet on the edge of our territory." Greg nodded, his decision already made. "Prepare a specialized exploration vessel. I'm leading this mission myself." Within hours, Greg had assembled his team. Jake Martinez stood ready, his experience on Earth making him an invaluable asset. Princess Nexar, with her combat expertise, would be essential in navigating the dangers of Zavor. Princess Voila's scientific knowledge would be crucial in identifying and extracting the quantium. As their ship broke orbit around Earth, Greg addressed his team. "We're headed into unknown territory. Zavor is unlike anything we've encountered before. Stay alert, stay together, and remember, the fate of two civilizations rests on the success of this mission." The journey to Zavor was tense but uneventful. As they entered the planet's atmosphere, the true nature of their challenge became apparent. Dense violet-hued jungles stretched as far as the eye could see, broken only by vast swamps that shimmered with an unnatural acidic glow. Their ship systems began to falter as they descended, affected by the planet's powerful electromagnetic field. Greg turned to his team. "Looks like we'll be doing this the old-fashioned way." "Voila, can you still track the quantium deposits?" The princess nodded, holding up a handheld device. "The scanner is shielded. It should lead us to the largest concentration." As they stepped out onto the planet's surface, the air was thick and humid, filled with the calls of unseen creatures. Vegetation moved in ways that seemed almost sentient, and more than once Greg could have sworn he saw flowers turning to watch their progress. They pushed through the dense foliage, each step a battle against the grasping vines and sudden sinkholes. Jake took point, his Earth survival training proving invaluable as he identified safe paths through the treacherous terrain. Nexar brought up the rear, her keen senses alert for any signs of danger. More than once, her quick reflexes saved them from ambush by predators that seemed to materialize from the very air around them. As they neared the location of the Quantium deposits, Voila's scanner began to emit a high-pitched whine. "We're close," she said, her voice hushed with anticipation. They crested a rise and found themselves looking down into a vast clearing. At its center stood the unmistakable remnants of a mining operation, but the architecture was like nothing they had seen before. "Zorth," Greg breathed. "They've been here." The team approached cautiously, scanning for any signs of recent activity. The mining equipment stood silent, covered in fast-growing Zorian vegetation, but it was clear that it hadn't been abandoned for long. "They'll be back," Jake said, voicing what they were all thinking. Greg nodded grimly. "Then we need to work fast. Voila, start the extraction. Jake, Nexar, let's set up a perimeter. I have a feeling we're going to have company sooner rather than later." As Voila began the delicate process of extracting the Quantium, Greg and the others quickly established defensive positions around the mining site. They worked efficiently, rigging alert systems and preparing for a potential Zorth counterattack. Hours passed in intense silence, broken only by the occasional screech of distant creatures and the hum of Voila's equipment. Suddenly, a tremor ran through the ground. Voila's eyes widened as she looked up from her work. "Greg," she called out, her voice tight with excitement. "I found something big." Greg made his way to her position, careful not to disturb the extracted Quantium. "What is it?" Voila pointed to a section of rock that had been newly exposed by their mining efforts. Embedded within it was a strange glowing object, its surface covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as they watched. "It's Zanari in origin," Voila said, her voice filled with awe. "And old. Very old. I think this might be the key component King Zak Thor mentioned in his encrypted messages." Greg's mind raced with the implications. This artifact could be the missing piece they needed to fully activate the planetary shield. It could be the key to their survival. As they worked to carefully extract the artifact, a shrill alarm cut through the air. Jake's voice crackled over their comms. "We've got incoming. Long-range sensors are picking up a Zorth battle fleet approaching the planet." Greg's heart pounded as he assessed their situation. They had the Quantium, they had the artifact, but now they faced a race against time to get off the planet before the Zorth arrived in force. "Pack it up," Greg ordered. "We're leaving now." As they scrambled to secure their precious cargo, the sky above began to darken with the approaching Zorth fleet. Greg knew that their escape from Zavor would be a desperate fight, one that would push them to their limits with the fate of Earth and the Zanari Empire hanging in the balance. Greg led his team back into the dangerous jungle. Their ship and their only hope of escape lay on the other side of terrain that seemed to grow more hostile by the minute. As they plunged into the undergrowth, Greg could only hope that they would be fast enough, and that the defenses they had prepared would be enough to hold off the Zorth until they could make their escape. The race against time had begun, and the outcome would determine the future of two civilizations. The dense jungle canopy seemed to close in around them as Greg and his team raced through the treacherous terrain of Zavor. The air crackled with tension, punctuated by the distant rumble of approaching Zorth ships entering the planet's atmosphere. "We're not going to make it to the ship in time," Jake panted, ducking under a low-hanging vine. Greg's mind raced, searching for alternatives. As they burst into a clearing, his eyes fell on the abandoned Zorth mining equipment. A spark of inspiration hit him. "Change of plans," he announced, his voice steady despite the urgency of their situation. "We're going to use their own tech against them." Voila's eyes widened as she grasped his intent. "An electromagnetic pulse? Brilliant, but it's our only shot," Greg replied, already moving towards the equipment. "Jake, Nexar, secure the perimeter. Voila, help me rig this up." They worked feverishly, repurposing the alien technology with a combination of Zanari knowledge and human ingenuity. "We need a power source," Voila said, her fingers dancing across a control panel. Greg nodded grimly. "The Quantium. It's our only option." As they integrated a small portion of the precious element into their makeshift device, the sky darkened ominously. The Zorth fleet had arrived. "Incoming," Jake shouted from his position. Greg took a deep breath, his hand hovering over the activation switch. "Everyone brace yourselves," he slammed the switch down. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then a wave of invisible energy pulsed outward, rippling through the air above them. The Zorth ships faltered, their engines sputtering and weapon systems going dark. "It worked," Nexar exclaimed, her eyes fixed on the sky. "Don't celebrate yet," Greg warned. "We've got a small window. Move." They sprinted towards their ship, the jungle itself seeming to part before their desperate charge. As they reached the vessel, Greg's heart sank. The launch systems were offline, likely affected by the planet's electromagnetic interference. "Voila, Jake, get those systems back online," he ordered. "Nexar, with me on weapons, we may need to shoot our way out." Greg slid into the pilot seat, his hands flying over the controls. The ship hummed to life around him, systems coming online one by one. Through the view screen, he could see the Zorth fleet beginning to recover. "Hang on," he shouted, punching the thrusters. The ship rocketed upward, the dense atmosphere of Zavor pressing them back into their seats. As they broke through the cloud layer, a gauntlet of partially disabled Zorth vessels loomed before them. "Nexar," Greg breathed, recognizing his wife's distinctive flying style. He opened a channel to her squadron. "Nexar, what's your status?" Her voice came back tight with concentration. "We've identified weaknesses in their formation, exploiting them now. Watch this." Greg held his breath as Nexar's squadron dove into the heart of the Zorth fleet. Their fighters danced between enemy ships, plasma bolts and energy beams crisscrossing the void. With a series of precision strikes, they broke through the Zorth's defensive screen and unleashed a barrage on the flagship's exposed flank. The enemy vessel shuddered under the assault, its shields flickering. Greg allowed himself a moment of hope before turning his attention back to the broader battle. His comm crackled with an incoming transmission from the planetary control center. Voila's holographic image appeared, her expression a mix of awe and concern. "Greg, the shield is performing beyond our wildest expectations," she reported. "The quantum energy output is off the charts," but she hesitated. "What is it?" Greg pressed. "We're pushing our power grid to the limit," Voila explained. "At current consumption rates, we have approximately 6 hours before shield integrity begins to falter." Greg nodded grimly, understanding. "Keep me updated on any changes. We'll make every minute count." As he closed the channel, another priority alert flashed across his screen. There was a message from Jake, encrypted and marked urgent. Greg's pulse quickened as he decoded it. Jake and his team had secured the prototype weapon on Earth, but they'd run into complications. A Zorth patrol had intercepted them en route back to the Zanari system. They were alive, but their return was delayed. Greg clenched his teeth, calculating the potential impact of this setback. Every moment the prototype weapon wasn't in their hands was another moment the Zorth held the advantage. A new transmission cut through his thoughts. Princess Leia's face appeared on screen, her usual poise strained by the intensity of the moment. "Greg, our new allies have arrived," she reported. "The Quran and Mandari fleets are at the system's edge," but she trailed off, frustration evident in her voice. "They're hesitating," Greg finished for her. "It wasn't a question." Leia nodded. "They're unsure of committing their forces. They need inspiration." Greg's mind raced. They needed to show strength to prove that this alliance was worth the risk. His eyes darted across the tactical display, analyzing troop movements and ship positions. Suddenly, a daring plan began to form. "Leia, inform our allies to stand by," Greg said, his voice taking on a steely edge. "They're about to witness something that will change the course of this war." He turned to his tactical officer. "Concentrate our forces on grid sector 17 Alpha. I want every available ship converging on that point." The officer's eyes widened. "Sir, that will leave our other sectors exposed if the Zorth counterattack." "They won't have time," Greg cut them off. "We're going to split their fleet in two." As the orders went out, Greg watched the holographic display, tracking the movement of hundreds of ships. It was a dangerous gambit, but if it worked, the communication crackled again. This time it was Zenthia's voice that filled the bridge. "Greg, long-range sensors are picking up a massive energy buildup in the Zorth rear lines. It's like nothing we've ever seen before." Greg felt a chill run down his spine. "Analysis, airy listing, based on the energy signature." Zenthia replied, her voice grim. "We believe it's a planet-killer weapon. If our calculations are correct, it could penetrate the planetary shield." The weight of two civilizations pressed down on Greg's shoulders as he absorbed this information. The Zorth were preparing their ultimate weapon. Jake was delayed with their prototype, and their new allies were wavering. Every second counted. Greg took a deep breath, steadying himself for the decision that could determine the fate of both Earth and the Zanari Empire. As he opened his mouth to give the order, Zenthia's voice cut through once more, this time with a note of excitement. Greg, wait, I've detected something else. There's a hidden frequency in the Zorth transmissions. It matches the energy signature of the artifact we recovered from Zavor. Greg's mind raced with the implications. Good. Could this be the key they'd been searching for? A way to turn the tide of the battle? Zenthia, voila, he called out. I need you both to analyze that artifact immediately. Find out what connection it has to the Zorth technology. As his wives set to work, Greg turned back to the battle raging before him. The space around the Zanari home world had become a maelstrom of energy, weapons, and explosions. The planetary shield flickered ominously as it absorbed increasingly powerful attacks. Greg knew he was pushing himself to the limit, trying to coordinate the defense while also pursuing this new lead with the artifact. But as he looked around at his team, at the humans and Zanari working side by side, at the drive in their eyes, he found new reserves of strength. The next few moments would determine everything. As Greg prepared to make his next move, he silently hoped that Jake would arrive with the prototype weapon in time, and that the secrets of the Zanari artifact would reveal themselves before it was too late. The battle raged on with the fate of two civilizations hanging in the balance. Greg Thompson stood at the center of the storm, ready to make the decisions that would shape the future of the galaxy. Greg's mind raced as he processed the flood of information. The Zorth's planet killer weapon, Jake's imminent arrival with the prototype, and the mysterious connection between the artifact and the enemy's technology. In that moment, a daring plan crystallized in his mind. All ships, create a corridor through our lines, Greg ordered, his voice steady despite the audacity of his command. I want a clear path to the Zanari home world. The bridge erupted in a flurry of confused protests, but Greg silenced them with a raised hand. Trust me, he said, his eyes locked on the tactical display as the Allied fleet began to move, opening a gap in their formation. Greg noticed the Zorth's reaction. Their massive supership carrying the planet-killer weapon began to advance into the newly created corridor. Sir, his tactical officer called out. The Zorth supership is moving into position. They'll be in firing range of the planet in minutes. Greg nodded, his expression resolute. It's time, exactly as planned. Voila, status on the artifact. Voila's holographic image flickered to life. We've isolated the frequency, Greg. It's ready, but I don't understand how. Stand by, Greg interrupted. Jake, what's your position? Jake's voice crackled through the comm. We're on final approach, sir. ETA 2 minutes. Greg allowed himself a small smile. Perfect timing, as Jake's ship, carrying the human prototype weapon, maneuvered into position above the Zanari capital. Safely inside the planetary shield, Greg felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Everything hinged on the next few seconds. The Zorth's supership loomed closer, its weapon systems powering up for what they believed would be the killing blow. Now voila, Greg commanded. Princess Voila activated the ancient Zanari artifact. A pulse of energy rippled through the planetary shield, expanding outward in concentric waves. For a heartbeat, nothing seemed to happen. Then, like dominoes falling in slow motion, the Zorth ships began to power down. Systems failed, engines cut out, and weapons went dark. As the mighty invasion fleet drifted aimlessly in space, suddenly as harmless as children's toys, Greg stared in awe at the tactical display. Incredible, he breathed. King Zak Thor's artifact, it's a master control for all technology derived from ancient Zanari designs, including the Zorth fleet. Nexar finished, her eyes wide with realization. Without wasting a moment, Greg opened a channel to Jake. Activate the prototype now. A brilliant pulse of energy erupted from Jake's ship, washing over the disabled Zorth fleet. The electromagnetic surge fried their systems permanently, ensuring they posed no further threat. As the reality of their victory set in, the bridge erupted in cheers. Greg allowed himself a moment to savor the triumph before focusing on the next step. Prepare a boarding party, he ordered. We're going to have a chat with the Zorth leadership. Minutes later, Greg stood in the cavernous command center of the Zorth supership, his 4 wives flanking him. Across from them, the Zorth Supreme Commander glowered, his massive frame tense with scarcely controlled rage. You have lost, Greg stated simply, but I'm not here to demand your unconditional surrender. The Zorth commander's eyes narrowed in confusion. What game are you playing, human? Greg took a step forward. I'm offering you a choice. Face trial for your actions against Earth and the Zanari Empire, or join us in forming a new galactic alliance. Pool your resources and knowledge with ours for the betterment of all species. The command center fell silent as the Zorth leader considered Greg's words, his eyes darting from Greg to each of the Zanari princesses, noting their united front. Finally, the commander spoke. "You could destroy us utterly, yet you offer partnership?" He shook his head in disbelief. "Perhaps we have underestimated you, Greg Thompson." Greg extended his hand. "What say you, Commander? Shall we forge a new future together?" After a moment's hesitation, the Zorth Supreme Commander grasped Greg's hand. "We accept your offer, human. Let us see what this alliance of yours can achieve." As Greg and his wives led the Zorth delegation back to their ship, he couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. In the days that followed, the Allied fleet began the monumental task of integrating the former Zorth forces. Greg and his wives worked tirelessly to lay the groundwork for their expanded alliance. Princess Leia threw herself into crafting a comprehensive peace treaty, balancing the interests of all parties with a deftness that left even seasoned diplomats in awe. Princess Nexar took charge of forming a multi-species peacekeeping force, combining the strengths of human, Zanari, and Zorth military doctrine. Meanwhile, Princess Voila assembled a team of the brightest scientific minds from all allied species, eager to unlock the full potential of the ancient Zanari technologies. Princess Zenthia designed an ambitious cultural exchange program, recognizing that true unity would require understanding and appreciation between all member species. As for Greg, he found himself at the center of it all, coordinating efforts and mediating disputes. The challenges were immense, but so too were the opportunities. One morning, as he stood on the balcony of the Zanari Palace overlooking the capital city, Greg reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this point. From a simple human diplomat to the leader of an interstellar alliance, he had faced challenges beyond imagination. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled him from his reverie. Turning, he saw his 4 wives joining him on the balcony, each bearing news of their respective projects. "The peace treaty is nearly finalized," Leia reported, her eyes shining with pride. Nexar nodded in agreement, "and the first joint training exercises for our new peacekeeping force are scheduled to begin next week. The scientific breakthroughs we're making with the Zanari artifact are beyond anything I could have imagined," Voila added, barely containing her excitement. Zenthia smiled warmly. "And you should see the enthusiasm for the cultural exchange program. It's bringing people together in ways I never thought possible." Greg looked at each of his wives in turn, feeling a surge of love and gratitude. "We've come so far," he said softly, "but there's still so much to do." As if on cue, an aide approached, bowing respectfully. "Excuse me, sir. The representatives from Earth have arrived for the charter signing ceremony." Greg nodded, straightening his posture. It was time to take the next step in their journey. With his wives by his side, he prepared to greet the human delegation and continue the work of building their new galactic order.